Hey there, internet friends, and welcome to another episode of That Nerdy Site Show, a weekly podcast where the team members from That Nerdy Site get together to talk about our lives and all of the nerdy things we love about them. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and I'm flying solo for a potentially brief episode this week. We had some plans in the works of who was going to join me, but some things fell through and some people are feeling sick, so just flying with me this week. I'm going to be talking a little bit about my thoughts on Dear Evan Hansen, the film that came out this weekend. Kind of giving my perspective on a longtime theater goer and how the movie kind of translates the play to film adaptation. And then also I finished Cana Bridge of Spirits. This last week. So, yeah, that's kind of going to be the main thrust of this week's episode. If you like what you hear, please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. And if you're feeling extra generous, you can always support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite, just like our wonderful Patreon producers do. So yeah, kicking things off with Dear Evan Hansen. Now, for those that don't know, the basic premise of Dear Evan Hansen is a young man named Evan Hansen is struggling with mental confidence issues and has a therapist and whatnot. And his therapist assigns him this task of writing pep letters to himself. Dear Evan Hansen, today's going to be a good day, and here's why. And he faces a lot of neuroses and kind of deals with that. And one of those letters ends up making its way in the hands of one of his fellow students, who ends up basically killing himself. And the family kind of misconstrues the letter that he had on him of Dear Evan Hansen as being kind of his last words. His suicide note, effectively. And Evan potentially struggling with kind of his own mental health issues, kind of feeds into that lie in a hope to give the family some solace on the loss of their son. And one thing leads to another. The lie just continues to kind of spread out and out of control, and it goes from there, basically. I want to echo. I watch a lot of content from Dan Merle on YouTube in his film reviews, and he does a weekly video kind of talking about the box office charts and stuff like that. But in his review of Dear Evan Hansen, he was very quick to point out that because this film deals with a lot of mental health stuff, if you are somebody who loves Dear Evan Hansen, and who loves the music and the story of Dear Evan Hansen, who loves the musical, who loves the film, whatever, I want to address that this is a very sensitive, potentially kind of show, and I don't want to at all feel like I'm attacking you if you love that show. That none of this is a personal kind of attack or anything like that. This is just my personal frustrations with this show, in a similar vein to kind of he shared his frustrations. I wish the show handled some of the elements that it tries to tackle better, and unfortunately it just misses the mark a lot of the time for me. One of the big criticisms coming out of this is the casting of Ben Platt, who's in his late 20s, as this high schooler Evan. I'm less bothered by that. It stood out it stands out visually for him. But there were also like elements where it's like, oh, sometimes it felt like the makeup team or something was trying to make him look younger, and just he ends up looking caked in makeup and stuff like that. And that was the most off-putting thing. But I've seen plenty of, actors in their 40s and 50s playing actors in their 20s and 30s, and actors in their 30s playing, teens and 20s and stuff like that. So like, I'm not bothered by that. He originated the role on Broadway. Cameron Abbott here on the site will be quick to point out that there's a, less than 0% chance, or a greater than 0% chance rather, that the reason he reprises the role in the film is that his father, producer, I believe Mark Platt, basically secured the film rights for the musical. So there's like a a potential nepotism element there, but I think it's more that he won the Tony Award for this, and we're 4 years removed from that basically. So they were like, yeah, we can still have him do it. I echoed, or I brought up when Cameron brought that up as a criticism that I sat through Rent, the film, with 6 of the 8 principal actors brought back 15 years after that after that show debuted on Broadway, well after any of them should be playing 20 something bohemians. um so I'm not overly concerned about that, and I think getting to see his portrayal on film is it's a fair assessment. My issue with the show in its original musical form continues here in the film version, and that is that one of the big numbers and a significant turning point for the show centers around Evan giving this speech at basically a memorial service for Connor, the kid who kills himself. And he basically sings this song about how no one deserves to be forgotten, and it's a very beautiful song in isolation, but in the context of the film, it comes after 40 minutes of Evan and others actively erasing and forgetting who Connor really was in favor of this more like fantasy idealized version of him. And while there's certainly an element of truth to that in how we grieve and how we process that, I don't think the film is has any interest in pointing out that nuance. It's very much just, well, Connor was a crappy kid and we all tried, but we all failed at making him better. So instead of like recognizing how crappy he was, or identifying where we may have been able to step in and do better or whatever, they're just like, well, let's latch on to this kid's like little lies and fantasies. And admittedly, they don't know their lies. The grieving family thinks that like Connor just had this secret life that he hid from them. Um, and I so the I see that no one deserves to be forgotten as a central theme of the film that Dear Evan Hansen and the original musical is trying to like address. And it always butts heads with the narrative of the play itself, the film itself. I will say, without getting into spoilers, beyond that, I guess, that the movie does at least take a step, I think, in the right direction to try and address this, as Evan is kind of like, you know, coping with or dealing with kind of the deceptions that he's led. I think he does try to get at who Connor really was, and he goes out of his way to investigate and do some research and find out who Connor really was so that he can keep a piece of Connor alive truly, which is a huge step up from the musical that just doesn't do that at all. Or at least not in any memorable way that I can recall, having seen it once or twice. I think I've seen it on stage. So like it gets a little bit of a step up there, but by and large, that's not like the musical doesn't see, or the show and musical and the film don't identify Evan for what he really is. They lean into, he's a troubled young man with mental health issues, which is like just a terrible stigma, it feels like to me, as opposed to like the emotional terrorism that he inflicts on this family through just like lying about their son and kind of like almost weaseling his way in. Like this, there's a musical, or well-known musical, Oklahoma, had a very successful run shortly prior to the pandemic, because it was recontextualized using the exact same, the original Rodgers and Hammerstein, lyrics and dialogue and everything, but they recontextualized it with like the motivations of the characters to turn all of the characters in that show into like just kind of evil assholes on this other character, Judd Fry. There's an entire song in Oklahoma about Judd Fry's dad, and hey, the world would be so much better off if you killed yourself, Judd Fry, and that's sung by the hero of the musical, Curly. So this recent remount basically like takes that particular perspective, and Dear Evan Hansen would be fascinating if that twist was kind of put on it of like everyone realizing that Evan's not a good guy in this, but the the musical and now the movie are both interested in presenting him as a hero who makes a bad decision, but then doesn't ever really have to suffer the consequences of that decision in a very frustrating way. So that remains my problem with the musical itself. Um, as far as the film, like performances are great. Caitlin Dever taking on the role of Zoe, who is Connor's sister, grieving sister, who also is basically the love interest of Evan in a whole other psychological thing that needs to be dealt with. But Caitlin Dever's really good in that role. I've only the only other thing I think I've seen her in was Booksmart. I really loved her in Booksmart, and so I was very excited to see her kind of take on this role, and she does a great job, kind of doing what is asked. Julianne Moore plays Evan's mother, and as a fan of the musical, despite my frustration, as a conflicted fan of the musical, I love the songs. I hate the story. um, her one of her big numbers gets cut. Like it's in the musical. There's a was it something with a map? Does anybody have a map? I think, and it's a on this in the stage version. It's the morning of the first day of school, and Julianne Moore's character and Amy Adams' character, who is Connor's mother, Connor and Zoe's mother. It's basically like the two families getting their kids ready for school, for the first day of school, and the struggles that each of them are facing in that regard. That's just entirely cut from the show. The show basically starts right off with the second number of Waving Through a Window, which is Evan's first real big number. And so I think as a result, Julianne Moore doesn't really have anything to do until her third act number comes back into play. So it's like, I feel like that was kind of a weird narrative choice. I also don't like the narrative change that they make in this film to make Connor's dad from like his biological dad in the play to his stepdad in this, because I feel like it hurts the inherent relationship between those characters, and the tension and I think it just does a disservice to the actor playing the father character, because there's that element of, well, he wasn't mine, versus like he wasn't mine and there was nothing I could do, versus he was, and I couldn't connect with him in the way I needed to. That said, Danny Pino playing that role, I think, does a great job in it, even if they cut one of his songs as well, about breaking in a glove, that he typically sings with Evan, as a metaphor for being unable to connect with Connor. So yeah, I think the loss of those songs is weird. And then there's a new song added in here. I think it's called The Anonymous Ones. It is added by the character of Alana, who is the overachieving young student who puts together this Connor project idea to memorialize Connor in the wake of his passing. And she's kind of the student body president, kind of go-getter kind of kid. And Amandla Stenberg does a great job kind of imbuing this character with a little bit more depth than she usually gets on stage. And part of that comes from this new song that she gets for the film, The Anonymous Ones, where she basically like connects with Evan on the medications that she's on, and the struggles and the mental her mental identity as well. And the song itself interesting. I'd probably need to listen to it a few more times to like really weigh in heavily, but in seeing it on film, like there's an immediate discord between how the lyrics are lining up with the music underneath. Like it feels like they're singing in different tempos. And I don't know why. I didn't like the mechanics of the song, if that makes sense, but I liked the idea and the intent and how it gives a new layer to this character that is hinted at in the original stage version, but isn't really seen to this degree. So, but yeah, Amanda Stenberg does a great job kind of portraying that role. I mean, like really good performances all around. It's just that I still struggle with the story that Dear Evan Hansen as a whole tells. I've never been a fan of the idea of like this guy tells this big lie that goes spinning wildly out of control, and he like wreaks emotional havoc on a number of characters in this story, and the story has no problem basically wrapping up with, well, and Evan learned his lesson, even though he didn't really. Like he like nobody like he doesn't get punished apart from this implied like emotional punishment he puts on himself or something like that, and it's frustrating that he just kind of gets away with it to a degree. So those are my thoughts on Dear Evan Hansen. I mean, it's as a longtime theater fan and goer and stuff, I felt like, you know, it was kind of my duty to go out and check this out here in theaters. And I kind of knew going in that I probably wasn't gonna. I like they would have had to drastically change elements of the story for me to like really be won over by the film. And they didn't do that. And I don't think they were interested in doing it. It very much ends up being like okay, then who's this for? Because I mean, I guess it's probably just for the people who really love the musical and don't see issues with those character choices or those story beat problems. And if that's you, great. You know, I hope you see the film. I hope you have a great time with it. But I just can never, you know, get past some of those big problematic elements for me. But that's Dear Evan Hansen. You know, good music, and again, I like all the performers. I think really like showed up to play, and do so in a good and compelling way. I just my bigger issues are too structural to have been addressed here. So I'm going to move on then to the other main topic of this episode, and that is Cana Bridge of Spirits. I, like many people, have been saying Kina with a long E since it got announced, but it's very quickly introduced that no, her name's Cana, and she it's pronounced Cana. So don't know why nobody ever corrected that, or why that never was made apparent, but whatever. Cana Bridge of Spirits is a fun little action platformer on the PlayStation 5. Yeah, there's a PlayStation 4 version as well, and probably PC, I think. I played it on PlayStation 5. It's kind of like a follow-up to Deathloop and to Toem, which I talked about on last week's show, which I finished, and that was a delightful little charming game like I talked about last week. Cana Bridge of Spirits is very much in the vein of kind of your classic 2D action or not 2D, your classic 3D action platformers. Whereas like Ratchet and Clank earlier this year was kind of your action platformer shooter. This is much more your hack and slash action platformer. Beautiful artwork, beautiful design to the game. The cutscenes in particular are, out of a DreamWorks animation kind of look and feel to them. And a lot of that carries over into the main game, but I did have a lot of performance issues, be it bugs or crashes and stuff like that as I was playing. Not like it's not going to be the ultimate thing that I think about when I think about my time with Cana Bridge of Spirits. More so that'll be like I got 4 hours into the game was like, screw this, I'm just gonna drop down the difficulty because I wasn't interested. Like, it doesn't. I mean, you're basically like restricted to standard heavy attack and like light attack kind of attacks, as well as a parry mechanic and a dodge roll. And you get a little bit of like powering those up over the course of the game, but largely you're pretty much locked into those things. And there are just like a lot of boss fights that it's just like, hey, regardless of what of those things you do, boss is going to nail you and you're going to be screwed. And if that happens like 2 or 3 times, like, there is enough of a soulsy element to the boss fights that I was like, nope, story mode difficulty, moving on. So yeah, I was bothered by that. Oh, you do also eventually you get like a bow upgrade, so you can shoot arrows and stuff. And then there's also I will say I liked the bomb upgrade, like this spirit bomb basically that you can launch at an enemy, and then if you shoot it with your bow or you use your pulse kind of ability that is kind of like a scan kind of thing, it will like explode. If it's on an enemy, it'll explode on the enemy. If it's on the ground or whatever, it'll explode there. And I liked that element both in the combat and in the way it kind of like introduced new puzzle mechanics and stuff. The bomb in particular, like you could use it on certain things that like glow blue in the world, and it will shoot them into the air and levitate them temporarily, basically turning them into platforms that you're going to need to kind of like hop around to get to the hard to reach places and stuff like that. And it was a cool new mechanic that I feel like I hadn't seen in a platformer like that before. So I really enjoyed that element. And then after a few seconds it'll they'll drop back down, and if you're underneath it when they drop, it will crush you and kill you, and you'll reload the game. But yeah, I think that one of the other elements of Kana that got a lot of kind of attention early on is the cute little rot figures, who are your little like, sidekick buddies. They're almost like the Pikmin, I guess. Having never played Pikmin, they kind of seem to serve a little bit of that role where they kind of follow you around. They don't they're not out there like fighting enemies or anything with you, but like you can command them into attack moves and stuff like that. And then they also kind of play a role in some of the puzzles and stuff like that, where it's like, oh, you need to get this statue moved from where it's toppled over to this little pedestal it needs to sit on. You can command the rot to pick it up, and then you kind of direct traffic. And so that was a fun little other element of this. And then you can also just customize them. One of the collectibles in the game is a bunch of little hats for these guys that you can then use some of the in-game kind of currency to acquire and equip on your rot as you are running around the place. So having them wearing little birthday hats or birthday cake, or I found a frog hat somewhere along. I found a unicorn hat somewhere along the line, and some of them are like limited. So like the unicorn, only one of them could wear the unicorn, whereas like I could unload 20 baseball caps on these guys if I wanted to, or something like that. But yeah, it was just a fun, aesthetic little element to the game. Hints of Metroidvania, but not too much. It's pretty much like if you really want to go back to that first area you found, now that you've got the bomb or something, you might be able to find like another thing or two, but it's not like it wasn't for story progression purposes. It's not Metroidvania in that regard. Like, you pretty much go to one area, you do everything you need to do in that area story wise, and then you go to another area. There's basically 3 areas that you kind of pursue, and each one has like a little 3-part kind of quest until you face off against like the final boss of that area and put their spirit to rest, as is Kana's role as the bridge of spirits. Yeah, it was a cute little game. It's very much something that especially Ember Lab, the team behind this, it's their first game. So coming out the gate like this with such a delightful, fun little story, and gameplay elements, I would be very curious to see kind of where everything levels up in a sequel, I guess. Because yeah, my biggest frustration was I didn't have the patience for the combat necessarily of this one. Like it was fine, but I was having a much better time after I lowered the difficulty and wasn't dying, in every boss encounter or something like that. Just made it, a more enjoyable experience. I didn't have the time or patience to sit down and figure out, okay, when the boss is doing this kind of move, that means I've got to, back away, because I would get so annoyed when a boss does their big heavy hit and then also has like two other heavy hits right after it. So if I got hit with that first one, I'm going to get hit with those next two, and I'm not going to have a chance to like avoid or do anything like that. And by then I'm almost dead. So that was frustrating. So, just dropping that down and being able to, dodge out of the way of those a little bit easier, quicker, or just having more, the attack's not doing as much damage, I think is kind of how their story mode really takes effect. And I think your damage does more. But yeah, Kena Bridge of Spirits, I highly recommend if you're sitting out there with stuff looking to play on in an otherwise maybe lighter year. Solid action platformer with some fun hack and smash mechanics, some fun puzzling, and lots of cute little characters to kind of help you along on your journey. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Kena Bridge of Spirits. And I think that's gonna do it for this episode. This is one I'll talk about next time when Cameron's on, but I just finished before recording tonight. I finished the Heavensward content and post-patch content stuff of Final Fantasy XIV Online. So I'm moving on to Stormblood next. Got Stormblood and Shadowbringers to still try and finish before Endwalker comes out in November, end of November. So I should be able to, do those all apace. But yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit more next time I have Cameron on, I'm sure. Yeah, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for joining me to hear my thoughts on Dear Evan Hansen and Kena Bridge of Spirits. You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey on Twitter. I will plug one of the Let's Plays this week. I don't know what the other one's going to be yet, but the Tuesday Let's Play will be like my first half hour-ish of my time with Kena Bridge of Spirits. So you can check that out tomorrow if you're listening to this episode the day it goes live over on YouTube at youtube.com/thatnerdysite, just like all of our Tuesday and Thursday Let's Plays that go up over there. And you can follow all of us over at That Nerdy Site, or go to thatnerdysite.com for all the latest content from us. Once again, if you liked what you heard, please rate, review, like, subscribe, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff, and maybe even consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite, where every patron gets early access to a monthly bonus episode of this very show. I need to sit down and record the end of September into October episode here probably in the next couple days with my team. I think the topic I'm gonna pitch, subject to change, is favorite Halloween costumes, since obviously Halloween is coming up here nearly upon us. So yeah, go check out that if you support us at the $1 or above level. As always, thank you for listening, stay nerdy, and be good to each other.